this is week 8 and the final week of Scrappy Celebration Sew Along. So by now you should have all of this yumminess finished right here. We have what? Let's see, 2, 4, 6, 7 by 8, 56 blocks of scrappy goodness. So usually by now you should have your blocks trimmed, finished out like you normally do. And just to kind of review what I do, and everybody has their own preference on this, as I make my blocks, I trim them and starch them. I don't starch them very much. I finish my block. I get my iron going on the hottest dry iron I can get, and then I take this Faultless Luxe finish. I spray it lightly and then use my iron on that, and then I come over here to the cutting table and I trim to the correct size, which they're all the same size. They're all 9.5 inch blocks, I do believe, if I haven't forgotten. Yes, 9.5. So unlike what you very organized people probably already have done, is have labeled your blocks A through M. I did not do that. I don't know why I didn't do that, but I didn't. So I've got to go back and figure out what letters are these, and then follow my diagram, my main diagram, which is page 41 of your pattern, to figure out where these go. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay out 2 rows here on the table for you, and that's what I would do anyway. If you've got a wall size design board that you want to just stick them up on and then pull them off of there and sew them, you could. But I typically do it this way because I don't like to do long rows of sewing. I like to do big 4 patches. So I'll have 3 big 4 patches, and then I'll have 1 to add to the end of each row once I get my 3 4 patches done. That's the way I do it. But you can do it one after the other, 1 row at a time. But I'm going to go ahead and get my 2 rows laid out here, and you can see how I'm going to do my construction. Alright, rows 1 and row 2. So I've got my camera up as high on the ceiling as it will go and safely mount, and you still can't see my last 2 pieces here. But the purpose of showing you this is how to construct it, not exactly where everything goes, because you will have your page 41 layout to use for that. And that's what I did. I picked out the squares according to this, and I also made sure I turned them, like in the case of this. I could have went this way with it. Might make a difference, might not. I'm just going to stick with this because the pattern designer wanted it that way. So that's what I'm going to do, just to be on the safe side, because we know this looks good. So there it is. That's what's going together first. And I am going to grab my first 2 blocks on my number 1 row, sew them together right here. I'm going to take my first 2 blocks on my number 2 row and sew them together. Once I iron those open, I'll have this long piece and this long piece. So I will join them right here. Then I'll have this giant 4 patch. I'm going to do the same thing right here and right here. Then my last 2 blocks, which you can't see, those will be added to this 4 patch. Then I will come back and join the 4 patches. Actually, this one will be a 6 patch, if there is such a thing. So let me do that. I'll show you in stages. I'm going to go ahead and do these 2, and across here first, so you can see what one large 4 patch looks like. Then I'll come back and do this one, add the other 2 pieces, then add them all together. Okay, here's my 2 long strips. So I wanted to stop and show you before I sewed that together. Now's your time to get your blocks really squared up with each other. So here's our main seam that we just did on both of these. So to do this long one, you're going to want to go to your center seam allowances that need to match and put your pin in there on the side that you're going to be sewing. And then any adjustments, if any, that need to be made. Mine turns out perfect. These blocks just came out so nice with doing that scant 1/4 inch. This one is a teeny tiny bit, you're not going to be able to see it if I pointed it out. It's a teeny tiny bit bigger than this one. Like, I don't know, maybe a 32nd. So now's my time I can make my adjustment on that with pins and just stick more pins in where I need to get rid of that slack. And it will, instead of ending up at the end still, it'll be interspersed in here without any puckers or gathers, because it's just a teeny tiny bit. So go through and put your pin in the center, matching those seams up. Put a pin on the close to the end, but not all the way to the end, because you know how I feel about that. Out here where these are even, and then out here where these are even, and then go in between and put how many ever number of pins you think you need to make that come out right even on the ends together. If you're doing long rows, you don't want to do this, definitely when you're putting your 2 rows together, start in the middle with your pin and go out and pin on each block corner, and then in between as you need to ease in any extra on a block. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up this one, do these 2 like I said, and add the end pieces, and then put my sections together. Here are my 2 giant 4 patches all finished. Now I'm left with this 4 patch and then my 2 straggler blocks, I'll say, or odd number here. So obviously 2 ways you could do this. You could go ahead and put this one on here and here and here, and you would have just 2 short seams, but then you would have this long seam. And yes, we are going to be sewing some long seams, but the less long seams the better, right? So I think what I'll do is go ahead and stick with my 4 patch. I will link these 2 together here and add this onto here. That way I'm never making a seam longer than the width measurement of 2 blocks. So that's what I'm gonna do, and I will get that sewn up and show it to you. Alright, so here's my 6 blocks that need to go together. I'll still do my seam here, but I wanted to just stop here and talk about how important it is to check this. I have not made a mistake yet, but I fully expect that somewhere along this process I'm going to turn some of these blocks around from what this pattern is. And it's much easier it's much easier to fix them now than when you've got your complete quilt top done and you're staring at it and see that you have a block turned wrong. So it's not as crucial in a scrappy quilt like this, but in some other quilts that really have an organized pattern to them, you don't want to see that because your eye goes right to it. And sometimes you just have to get right in the middle of it and start seam ripping. So it's better to look 3, 4, 5, 6 times at it. Even if you're still not sure, take a picture. Look at your picture in black and white, compare it to this. There's all kinds of little tricks you can do to make sure that you don't turn a block the wrong way. So I'm going to go ahead and connect this, and I'll connect my other 2 big 4 patches to this one, and I'll show you that first 2 rows section finished. Okay, I got my first 2 row section done. I will tell you, this does not save any time. You're not going to save any time. It doesn't take any longer either. So, yeah, I recommend this way of doing it in the 4 patches. And I do want to, this went together really well, by the way. This pattern, you know, and the sewing that I did, everything's matching up pretty well. I feel like right here, I eased a little bit. See that little thing? And that's going to happen when you ease in seams. That material has to go somewhere, so it goes up. So probably when this is quilted, you can see how that's probably going to just fade into the distance to where you can't really tell that it's there. That's the only spot in this whole thing that I can see where I may have eased in a little bit when I was doing this seam, because I pinned here and started here, I believe, and sewed down. So, you know, I matched up really good here, and I don't have anything left on the ends, so that's the only thing I can think of is what that is. But, you know, it's not a perfect science. Sewing in general is not. Quilting is not. Don't knock yourself if you've got some of this, because that's just part of the process of quilting. So there's ways to deal with everything. It's definitely better to have this than to have a 1/4 inch hanging off on one end or something like that. And doing it this way in these big 4 patches helps you to get control of that beforehand, where you don't, if you have long rows that you're putting together, there's more opportunities for it to have a lot of this right here. That one's, I don't think that's one there, but this definitely is, you can see it. And because I use that white on white, which isn't very, you know, dense in design and color, you know, it pops out like that. But if you ease in, it's got to go somewhere, and it usually goes up. So no worries at all if you have some of that, or even if you have a lot of that, because by the time it gets quilted, you're not going to notice that anymore. So I have looked at this a million times to make sure that I've got these in the right place. I think I do. So I'm going to go ahead and do my other 3 sections like this. So once I have these 3 sections finished, I will have 1, 2, 3 long seams to do. So instead of having 8 long seams, I only have 3, and I can deal with that. And having these 4 sections like this already matched nicely, those 3 seams will probably be more likely to go together good. We'll see. That's what I'm headed to do now. I'm going to go ahead and make my other 3 pairs of rows and put those together, and then the next time you see me, you'll probably be seeing a finished quilt top, unless I have some other tick or trick along the way before I get to that point. All right, hang here with me. Okay, I have a little more to tell you before we get these big sections together. I have 4 sections now. I have a pile of 3. So this is 1 is the first one, 2, 3, and then this is a single one. This is 4. This is my last one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this number 3 section and pull it like this, and I know then that I've got these 2 sections positioned correctly to sew this seam right here. Don't get mixed up and sew the seam down here. It's this one, so keep that in mind. This is where we're going to start pinning, so your pins should be a big clue, shouldn't it? I'm continually referring to this, like I said before, a million times. Let me turn a light on here. You can see what I'm doing. And then I'm going to start pinning. So I don't like pins, and you all know it. I could use clips, but I don't think clips hold it as well when you're dealing with all these little seams. So I'm just going to pick out my centermost block, which is this one, and I'm going to pin the exact same seam on the other section on that block on both ends. Then I'll come back and I'll probably put one in the center here. And then I'll go outward in both directions, pinning the outer seams of each block together. And I like to use those little purple fork pins. You've seen them. Then when you get out to the end, it's just like when we were doing our smaller pieces. You want to even that up. Put a pin below where you're going to start stitching. And then after that, you can add more pins. If you're finding that you need to ease in some, the sooner you start, the better. So you're going to have to pay close attention as you're sewing to see what kind of slack you're getting in either side of these sections. So whichever side has the slack, you're going to have to ease that in by stretching your opposite side a little bit at a time. So that's what I'm going to do now. And like I said before, if you have a big board that you can just lay all your big sections out on and go grab them, that's ideal. I've got stuff on my board right now I don't want to take off, and this table is working perfect, so I'm just going to work with what I have. So this is my last section and my third section. I'm going to sew those up. Now once I get this section completed, I will open my seam and iron it and set this big half section to the side. Then I will pull down my number 2 section, just like I had my number 4 section. I will pull it down here and pull the number 1 section over the top of that. And do the same procedure with that section as I did with this one. Then I will have 2 large 4-row sections. That would be my 8 rows all together. And then I will just join those. There again, paying very close attention to where things go. Alright, so hopefully when you see me next, I don't know, I said this in the last clip, but maybe when you see me next, or see this quilt next, it will be hanging somewhere complete. Hang on for that. Here we are. I've got it laying on the table for now. It's kind of at an angle. I was trying to cover my table. It went together nice, didn't it? And I think that's all in part to having done the sections the way we did them. We dealt with the inaccuracies that we may have had in our seams, or maybe even in our initial cutting, back in those smaller sections. So our blocks were trimmed to size, and then if we still had something left over when we put our small sections together, we dealt with it. So just for those 3 long final seams, I didn't have to adjust anything. I hope you didn't either. So it went together really, really nice. This was a very fun pattern to do. But I want to mention some other things before we conclude this sew along. Is if you look back on the planning page that we started with, down at the bottom you'll see that you need 5/8 yard of binding. So if you would like to add a border to your quilt before you do binding, you may need more than 5/8 of an inch. So you'll have to remeasure your quilt once you get your border or borders on it. So I'm not going to add a border onto mine. I'm just going to do, I'm thinking I'm going to do a scrappy border out of my oranges. I have quite a bit of one orange, but I didn't have enough to get around it. I'm short just a little bit. So I think what I'm going to do is cut up all the rest of my oranges that I have, and then cut the big main orange strips into smaller strips as well, and just make an orange scrappy binding for it. That's what Lisa Alexander did on hers, and what she called for in the pattern. So I'm going to do that. Suggestions on borders. I would take a, you know, a 2-inch or so border of one of your lower volumes that you have, one of your whites, or if you used a white on white or solid looking background like I did, I would take a couple of inches around and then add a print border if you have a large print, or, you know, like a medium to large scale print for an outer border that could be 4 or more inches wide. And there again, you'll just have to measure out yourself and calculate what that will be. The quilt right now is 63.5 by 72.5. So you'll need, with it like that, if that's how you're going to quilt yours in that size, the 5/8 inch will work. You will need 7 strips with the fabric at 2.5 inches. So that's pretty standard for a quilt this size. So just wanted to mention those things. I hope you had fun with this sew along. I know I did. I'm surprised we're done already with it. And look what we have out of our scraps. Isn't this wonderful? This is a beautiful quilt. And who knows, maybe we'll pull this one out again in a couple of years and do it again, because by then we'll have all new scraps to pull from. So let me go ahead and hang this outside on the porch so you can get a full view of my quilt top. I think it turned out beautifully, and I have seen some pictures of some of yours already, and they're gorgeous as well. And I hope you're happy with your quilt top that you finished on this scrappy celebration sew along. If you're not finished, keep plugging along. You'll get there, and these videos will always be here for you to reference if you need. All right. Thanks for sewing along with me, and we'll have another sew along very soon. Bye.